Have you ever felt like the day was over and you barely noticed how it happened? You check the clock, glance at your phone, and suddenly an hour is gone. It wasn't hard work, it wasn't something important, it was just distraction. And when this keeps happening, an uncomfortable question begins to surface. Why does time seem to pass so fast? In this video, you'll understand that this feeling isn't just emotional, nor is it a coincidence of modern life. We'll explore how the way your attention is captured every day shapes your perception of time, why Jesus said that time would be shortened, and how this connects to a mind that is constantly stimulated, tired, and fragmented. Here, technology isn't treated as the villain, but awareness, spiritual and practical, of where your life is actually being lived. If you feel like you're always rushing, like your days pass without depth, like there's little time left for God, for yourself, or for what truly matters, this video is for you. And if you've ever caught yourself thinking, before I knew it, the day was over, maybe the problem isn't a lack of time, but a lack of presence. There is a kind of tiredness that doesn't come from too much effort, but from a lack of meaning. You end the day feeling exhausted, yet when you try to identify the cause, nothing seems to justify the weight you feel. It wasn't hard work, it wasn't an intense conflict, it wasn't something clearly draining, and still, something inside you feels worn out. It's as if the day passed without truly being lived. This feeling repeats itself in many modern routines. People move through their days functioning, answering messages, handling demands, switching between stimuli, but rarely being fully present in any moment. The body follows schedules, but the mind remains scattered. When night comes, the day ends without a clear memory, without inner marks, without the sense that something truly remained. There is a deep difference between being busy and being present. Busyness can fill the schedule, but presence is what fills the inner life. Without presence, time fails to bond with awareness. It passes, but it doesn't settle, and everything that doesn't settle within us feels like it disappeared too quickly. That's why so many days seem to vanish. Not because time is objectively shorter, but because attention is rarely whole in one place. When you live divided between stimuli, parallel thoughts, constant notifications, and quiet worries, the day fragments from the inside. It stops being an experience and becomes nothing more than a sequence of automatic responses. There is also a common illusion, the idea that full days are lived days. A day can be completely packed with tasks and still end empty of meaning. What gives weight to time is not how many things are done, but the quality of attention given to them. Without attention, nothing creates enough depth to remain in memory or in the heart. When the day ends and you try to remember what truly stayed, what often remains is only a vague sense of tiredness. Few clear moments, few vivid memories. This happens because the mind does not deeply register what was lived on autopilot, and the heart does not recognize as experience what was not inhabited with awareness. It is exactly at this point that the Bible offers a simple yet deeply revealing prayer. The text says, "Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom." Indeed, this is found in the book of Psalms, chapter 90, verse 12. This prayer is not a request for more time, nor for longer days. It is a request for awareness of the time that already exists. When the psalmist asks to learn how to number our days, he is not talking about counting hours, but about perception. To number in this context is to recognize the value of the day while it is happening. It is to live time consciously rather than merely passing through it. Biblical wisdom begins when a person learns to perceive time while living it, not only after it has passed. A wise heart, according to this text, is not one that does everything, but one that perceives. One that recognizes when it is present and when it is only reacting. One that notices when it has lived on autopilot and learns how to return. Wisdom here is not linked to speed, but to attention. When this awareness is missing, time loses density. It creates no inner roots, produces no learning, leaves no deep marks. That's why when looking back there is a sense that entire weeks pass too quickly, even without major events. Time existed, but it was not integrated into inner life. You may have noticed that a single simple moment, lived with attention, can remain in memory for years, while entire distracted days disappear almost immediately. This reveals something important. Time only becomes meaningful when it finds presence. Without presence, it does not turn into experience. God never asked human beings to live days full of performance, but days full of awareness. Spiritual wisdom is not born from hurry, but from perception. It is not born from doing more, but from being fully present in what is already being done. And when this wholeness begins to return, time, without changing externally, starts to transform from within. Today, many people feel that time has accelerated, but few realize that what truly changed was the way the mind now functions. It's not that the hours are shorter, it's that attention is almost never whole. You start something and, before finishing, you already feel the impulse to check something else. You open an app with a simple intention, and minutes later, you're somewhere else, unsure how you even got there. This fragmentation creates a strange experience. The day feels full and empty at the same time. There is constant movement, but very little real awareness. The mind jumps from stimulus to stimulus without resting in any of them. And when there is no rest, there is no deep registration of the present. Time lived without registration is almost always felt as time lost. It's important to understand this clearly. Time doesn't speed up when we are busy. It speeds up when we are divided. When attention spreads across many small focuses, none of them deepen. The day stops being a continuous experience and becomes a sequence of disconnected fragments with no real connection between them. Social media and digital environments enter this picture not as enemies, but as silent trainers of attention. They teach the mind to respond quickly, to seek constant novelty, to switch focus before anything can grow depth. Over time, this logic moves beyond entertainment and begins shaping how a person lives conversations, work, rest, and even spiritual moments. When the mind becomes accustomed to constant stimulation, it loses something essential: the ability to remain. To remain in a task without checking something else. To remain in a conversation without dividing attention. To remain in silence without discomfort. To remain before God without hurry. Without this ability, time is no longer lived, it is merely passed through. This helps explain why so many people feel they pray less, reflect less, and notice God's presence less in daily life. Not because God is distant, but because the mind rarely stays long enough in one inner place. Continuous distraction doesn't just steal focus, it steals spiritual depth. The Bible addresses this with surprising relevance when it says, "All things are lawful for me, but not all things are beneficial. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be dominated by any of them." This appears in the first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 6, verse 12. Paul is not talking about external rules, but about inner governance. The principle is clear. Whatever dominates attention ends up governing life. The issue is not what is allowed or forbidden, but what silently takes control of the heart and mind. When something dominates, a person stops choosing consciously and begins merely reacting. And a reactive mind rarely finds rest. Freedom without discernment does not produce peace, it produces dispersion. A person may feel free, but lives constantly pulled by external impulses. This creates a continuous state of alert, where the inner life never fully organizes itself. In this state, the day may seem intense, but it is rarely deep. There is an important difference between intensity and fragmentation. True intensity generates memory, learning, and meaning. Fragmentation generates tiredness, confusion, and the sense that time slipped through your hands. At the end of the day, the body is tired, but the heart doesn't quite know why. When the mind does not rest, time is not registered. And when time is not registered, it feels like it passed too quickly, not because hours were missing, but because wholeness was missing. There was no full presence in something that could become a real experience. Perhaps, without realizing it, this state of dispersion has become normal for you. Maybe it feels like just the rhythm of modern life. But biblical wisdom does not call for isolation or rejection of the world. It calls for discernment, not to lose freedom, but to recover inner governance. This understanding begins to prepare the ground for something deeper. As attention slowly starts to reorganize, time stops slipping away so quickly. Not because the world slowed down, but because the mind began to return inward. And it is from this quiet return that spiritual depth begins to form once again. There are days when almost nothing goes wrong, and yet something still feels deeply out of place. You complete tasks, consume information, answer messages, move through commitments, and distract yourself in the gaps. Everything seems normal, and yet by the end of the day, the feeling is unsettling, as if the day passed over you without truly being lived. There was no obvious pain, no clear crisis, just a shallow quality that's hard to explain. Shallow days are not days empty of activity. On the contrary, they are usually full of stimuli, small demands, neutral content, quick conversations, and automatic decisions. The problem is that almost none of this creates inner roots. And whatever doesn't create roots doesn't remain. It passes quickly because it finds no depth where it can settle. An excess of what is neutral is especially dangerous because it doesn't feel threatening. It doesn't seem wrong. It doesn't raise alarms. It doesn't create immediate guilt. And yet, it occupies the space that should belong to what is essential. When everything is allowed to enter, almost nothing stays long enough to transform. The mind retains fragments, headlines, loose phrases, images, opinions, but the heart holds very little. There is a lot of information and very little assimilation, a lot of contact and very little transformation. You know many things but live very few of them. And when there is no inner transformation, time does not become meaningful experience. Jesus addressed this exact pattern when he explained why the word often fails to produce lasting fruit. He said, "The cares of this world, the deceitfulness of riches, and the desires for other things enter in and choke the word, and it becomes unfruitful." These words are recorded in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 4, verse 19. According to Jesus, the problem is not the absence of the seed, but the environment where it falls. It's important to notice what the text highlights. It does not speak of direct rejection or open opposition to God. It speaks of cares, fascinations, and ambitions, things that belong to ordinary life. The choking does not happen through frontal attack, but through the quiet accumulation of what is secondary. This is a key point for understanding why days pass so quickly. When the inner life is constantly occupied with neutral things, the essential finds no space to create roots. The word arrives, the truth is heard, but it does not remain long enough to descend into the heart. Without roots, there is no spiritual depth. There is contact, but no permanence. There is listening, but no assimilation. And days without spiritual roots pass quickly because they leave no inner marks. They flow away like water over a smooth surface without soaking in. This helps explain why so many people feel that time is speeding up, even without living through major crises. The inner life is too full to allow depth. The heart is occupied but not nourished. And a heart that is not nourished loses the ability to perceive the value of lived time. Depth is not born from effort but from space. It does not arise from trying to do more spiritual things, but from creating inner space for something to truly settle. When everything competes for attention, nothing deepens. The mind receives much, but the heart processes very little. Jesus does not describe this process to accuse or condemn. He reveals it so that discernment may arise. The warning is not do more, but notice what is occupying the space, because what occupies inner space determines what creates roots, and what creates roots defines what remains when the day ends. Perhaps you are beginning to realize that the problem is not that days are too short, but that they are too shallow. There is no lack of time, there is a lack of depth. And depth does not require isolation or radical life changes. It begins with awareness of what is being allowed to remain within you. When roots begin to form, something shifts quietly. The day may remain simple, ordinary, even repetitive, but it is no longer empty. Time does not need to be extraordinary to be meaningful. It needs to be inhabited with attention, meaning, and inner space. If this kind of reflection has helped you see invisible patterns in your own life and recover inner clarity, consider subscribing to the channel. That way you can continue walking through content that does not accelerate the mind, but leads toward depth, discernment, and a more rooted faith. And as this depth begins to emerge, a new understanding also opens. Vigilance is not living in anxious alertness, but learning to be fully present. That is what begins to reveal itself next. There is a word that many people have learned to associate with fear, spiritual pressure, and constant anxiety. Yet in the teaching of Jesus, it points to something far more simple, human, and freeing: vigilance. Over time, this word has been loaded with tension, as if to watch meant living in a permanent state of alert, waiting for something bad to happen or for the future to bring imminent danger. For many, vigilance has become synonymous with inner rigidity, a posture of someone who can never relax, never slow down, never lower their guard. This understanding produces the exact opposite of what Jesus intended: restlessness, a racing mind, difficulty resting, and a spirituality rooted in tension rather than presence. When Jesus speaks of vigilance, however, the context is entirely different. He says, "Take heed, watch and pray, for you do not know when the time will come." These words are recorded in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 13, verse 33. The focus is not on creating fear about tomorrow, but on calling attention to how the present is being lived. To watch, in this sense, is not to anticipate future scenarios or imagine everything that could go wrong. It is to be awake while life is happening. It is to not move through the days on autopilot. It is to not allow the mind to live in constant distraction, reacting to stimuli without perceiving what is happening within. A mind that lives scattered does not watch. It merely reacts. It reacts to notifications, reacts to repetitive thoughts, reacts to external pressures, reacts to the expectations of others. It is always busy, but rarely conscious. And when the mind lives in this reactive state, time passes too quickly because almost nothing is truly observed or absorbed. Jesus does not call people to a hurried life, but to an awakened one. He does not teach vigilance as urgency, but as presence. His invitation is not run, something is about to happen, but wake up, something is already happening. Biblical vigilance is a state of calm attention, not anxious alertness. This radically changes the relationship with time. When you are present, even simple moments gain density. An ordinary conversation, a moment of silence, a small decision begin to leave inner marks. Time does not need to be extraordinary to be meaningful. It needs to be perceived as it unfolds. Many people confuse vigilance with control. They believe watching means constantly managing thoughts, emotions, and behavior. But Jesus never proposed this kind of rigidity. The vigilance he teaches is not excessive control, but continuous awareness. Not watching to punish oneself, but watching in order to perceive. To watch is to recognize when attention has wandered and gently bring it back. It is to notice when the mind has left the present and return without guilt or accusation. It is a constant inner movement of return, not a demand for spiritual perfection. When Jesus unites vigilance and prayer, he is connecting attention and relationship. To pray in this context is not merely to speak, but to be present. A distracted mind may pronounce religious words, but it rarely perceives God's presence in everyday life. Vigilance creates space for this quiet, real awareness. Perhaps you are beginning to see that the issue is not a lack of spiritual effort or absence of faith. Often, it is excess dispersion, not inner rebellion, but difficulty remaining. And Jesus responds not with pressure or threat, but with a gentle invitation to awareness. This vigilance does not steal peace, it restores it. Because when the mind leaves autopilot and enters attentive awareness, the inner life begins to organize itself. Emotions become clearer, thoughts slow down, and time stops flowing in a confusing way. At this point, something important adjusts. Vigilance is not fear of the future, it is presence in the now. Not living worried about what is coming, but attentive to what is already here. And when this presence settles in, the relationship with time begins to change from the inside out. From this understanding, a teaching of Jesus that is often misunderstood begins to take on new meaning. When he speaks of time being shortened, he is not threatening, but protecting. This more mature lens completely changes how that text is read. And that is exactly what we need to look at next. There is a passage from Jesus that, over time, has often been used to generate fear, spiritual tension, and a constant sense of urgency, when in fact it reveals exactly the opposite. Jesus says, "And if those days had not been shortened, no human being would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened." These words are recorded in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 24, verse 22. The way this text is commonly interpreted says far more about the mindset of the reader than about Jesus' true intention in speaking it. For many, this statement sounds like a threat, as if God were announcing a shortening of time as a form of judgment, punishment, or spiritual pressure. But when the passage is read with maturity and care, the center of the message is not fear, but mercy. The shortening of time appears as an act of protection, not punishment, as care for human limitation, not urgency imposed from heaven upon the earth. Jesus describes a scenario of extreme exhaustion, a world overloaded, emotionally saturated, inwardly stretched to its limits. The phrase, "no one would be saved," does not point only to a final destination, but to the human inability to remain whole under continuous excess. If everything continued at the same pace, something essential would be lost along the way. This detail completely changes how the passage is understood. God is not accelerating the clock of history. He is preserving the human heart. The shortening of time does not come from divine haste, but from compassion. It is as if God were saying, if the weight continues to increase, the inner life will not endure. Something must be limited so that life can remain possible. Seen from this angle, the text connects deeply with the modern sensation that time is accelerating. We are not simply living many days, we are living days that are too dense, too full, too demanding. The mind does not rest, the heart does not settle, attention does not anchor itself. In this context, God's mercy does not appear as more demand, but as loving restraint. The verse does not suggest that God is taking time away from people, but that he is preventing excess from destroying what is essential. To shorten, here, is not to diminish value, but to avoid collapse. It is to establish a protective boundary, not to announce a threatening end. God does not glorify human exhaustion, nor does he romanticize spiritual burnout. This passage reveals something profound about God's character. He knows human limits better than human beings themselves. He knows how much stimulation the mind can endure, how much pressure the heart can carry, how far the soul can remain sensitive without hardening. Where human beings push forward, God preserves. For this reason, this verse should not produce anxiety, but relief. It shows that God does not expect you to endure everything, that He does not confuse faith with overload, that spirituality is not endless resistance, but preserved sensitivity. The shortening of time emerges as a quiet gesture of care for those who are already deeply tired. Perhaps what you perceive as time passing too quickly is not a sign of abandonment or loss of control, but of protection. Perhaps God is discreetly preventing excess from carrying you to a place of inner hardening, where it would no longer be possible to feel, perceive, or remain present. When this reading matures, something important adjusts in your relationship with rhythm. God does not operate in desperation or emotional urgency. He does not race against time. He cares for the inner life, so that time, even when limited, can still be lived with meaning, presence, and awareness. And it is precisely from this understanding that an essential distinction begins to emerge. God does not work in hurry, but in rhythm. He does not accelerate processes, He sustains them. This difference completely reshapes how you understand time, fatigue, and life itself. And this is what needs to be observed more clearly next. There is a profound difference between rhythm and hurry, though many people confuse the two. Hurry is born from anxiety, from the fear of falling behind, from the constant feeling that something is missing or slipping away. Rhythm, on the other hand, is born from inner alignment. It does not push or pull, it sustains. And this difference completely changes how time is experienced day by day. Much of modern exhaustion does not come from how many things we do, but from the misaligned rhythm in which we live. Hurry pushes the mind constantly forward. It allows no presence, only anticipation. Even when nothing urgent is happening, the inner life remains accelerated, as if always late for something invisible that never arrives. Hurry also creates a dangerous illusion: productivity. Everything feels intense, necessary, urgent, and yet at the end of the day, the body is tired while the inner life remains restless. Hurry consumes energy, but rarely produces fruit. It fills time, but does not organize it. God has never operated from hurry. Scripture reveals a God who works through times, seasons, and processes. The text says, "For everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven." These words are recorded in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3, verse 1. This verse does not speak of speed, but of order, not of urgency, but of harmony. God's rhythm is neither slow nor fast. It is fitting. Each thing happens at the right time because the inner life is prepared to sustain it. Hurry, by contrast, tries to produce results before there is inner structure to receive them. That is why it generates anxiety, frustration, and a constant sense of misalignment. When life is lived in hurry, time feels too short. Everything must happen quickly. Everything must be resolved immediately. Everything must be absorbed all at once. But the human interior was not created to function this way. It needs pauses, assimilation, silence, and space for experiences to become learning. God's rhythm respects this process. He does not force growth, accelerate maturity, or demand fruit out of season. Where there is rhythm, there is inner rest, even amid responsibility. Where there is hurry, there is constant exhaustion, even when the schedule appears relatively light. This helps explain why so many people feel they have no time for God. Often, it is not a lack of time, but an excess of inner hurry. Hurry steals the ability to perceive. It turns even spiritual moments into tasks to complete rather than encounters to live. God does not operate in environments of distraction or emotional urgency. He reveals himself where there is inner space, where the mind slows enough to notice, where the heart is not being pushed from one stimulus to another. Rhythm creates this space. Hurry destroys it before anything deep can take root. When rhythm begins to be restored, something quietly shifts. The same tasks still exist, the same commitments remain, but the way you move through them changes. The day stops being a race and becomes a path. Time does not lengthen outwardly, but it becomes ordered within. Perhaps what you call a lack of time is actually a conflict between the rhythm of your life and the rhythm of your inner world. God does not ask you to live faster, but more aligned, not more full, but more aware. And it is within this subtle adjustment that time begins to stop feeling like an enemy. When this alignment begins to take shape, a practical and delicate question naturally arises. How do we live this new rhythm without guilt, without rigidity, and without turning awareness into another form of pressure? This is what must be understood before any direct application. Many people hear the phrase "redeem the time" and immediately think of being more productive, organizing their schedule better, or eliminating waste. This interpretation, though common, almost always gives rise to a quiet sense of guilt, the constant feeling that you're never doing enough, never using the day well, never living the way you should. Instead of freedom, pressure is born. Instead of presence, self-demand takes over. The Bible uses this expression in a far more human and profound way. The text says, "Redeeming the time, because the days are evil." These words are found in the letter to the Ephesians, chapter 5, verse 16. Paul is not speaking about efficiency or life optimization. He is speaking about awareness, not about doing more things, but about living differently within what already exists. To redeem in this context does not mean accelerating the pace or filling the day with spiritual activities. It means rescuing time from a state of dispersion, taking the day off autopilot, returning to the present what was slowly taken away by hurry, constant distraction, and an excess of stimuli that fragment attention. When Paul says that the days are evil, he is not describing only external difficulties or hard times. He is recognizing an environment that constantly pulls the inner life outward. An environment that exhausts the mind, scatters the heart, and empties the experience of the present moment. To redeem time, then, is a quiet act of resistance against this ongoing fragmentation. This completely changes the practical application of the passage. Redeeming time is not about waking up earlier out of obligation, nor creating rigid routines to prove spiritual discipline. It is about learning to create inner space, space to notice what is happening within you, space to breathe without hurry, space to be fully present in something simple without guilt for not doing something else. Many people try to change their relationship with time by adding more control, when what is truly missing is awareness. Control creates rigidity. Awareness creates choice. When awareness returns, time begins to gain depth, even if nothing changes externally. The same hours exist, but they are lived differently. Redeeming time also means removing guilt from the center of spiritual life. Guilt paralyzes. Guilt fragments even further. God does not call us to a heavier life, but to a more inhabited one. The biblical invitation is not do more, but be more whole. It is not about performance, but about presence. Silence plays an essential role in this process, not as complete absence of sound, but as the absence of excessive stimulation. When small spaces of silence begin to exist, the mind slows down, the heart reorganizes, and time stops being perceived as a constant enemy that must be defeated. It is in this space that God's presence stops feeling distant and begins to be perceived in everyday life, not through extraordinary experiences, but through a clearer awareness of the now. When presence returns, time does not need to be long to be meaningful. It needs to be lived with attention and wholeness. Perhaps you are beginning to realize that redeeming time does not require changing your entire life, but changing the way you move through your day. It is not about having more hours, but about being more present within the hours that already exist. This is where time begins to slow down on the inside, even if the world continues to move quickly on the outside. This process does not happen all at once, nor does it demand perfection. It begins quietly, almost imperceptibly, when awareness takes the place of hurry, when life stops being merely passed through and slowly begins to be inhabited. If this kind of content has helped you see life with more clarity, less guilt, and greater spiritual awareness, consider subscribing to the channel. That way you can continue walking through reflections that do not pressure or accelerate the mind, but restore inner rhythm and awareness of God's presence in daily life. And when this awareness begins to take root, something becomes possible, realizing that perhaps time never ran away from you. Perhaps it was simply waiting to be lived in a different way. It is with this perception that everything can finally come together with meaning. Perhaps along this journey you have come to see that time itself was never truly the problem. The hours were always there. The days were always the same length. What slowly changed was the way they were being lived, often with hurry, distraction, and little presence. And when presence is missing, time feels like it slips away. The Bible offers a simple and profound image for this final moment. It says, "Be still and know that I am God." This statement is found in the book of Psalms, chapter 46, verse 10. It is not a harsh command. It is an invitation, a call to stop fighting against the rhythm of life and allow the inner world to find rest. God is not racing against time. He does not live in urgency. He does not compete for attention with endless stimuli. He waits. And this waiting is not passivity. It is presence. Often what feels like God's silence is simply an invitation for the heart to slow down enough to realize that He has always been there. Perhaps time has not passed too quickly after all. Perhaps it was simply not inhabited. Not because you failed, but because you lived in an environment that constantly fragments attention. And recognizing this should not produce guilt, but relief. Because what can be perceived can also be cared for. When hurry gives way to space, something shifts. The day does not become perfect, extraordinary, or free of responsibility, but it becomes more real, more whole, more present. And that is enough for time to regain its meaning, even without stretching longer. Perhaps, from this point forward, you do not need more hours. You simply need more presence within the hours you already have. Not to do more, but to be more whole. Not to slow down out of obligation, but to perceive more deeply through awareness. And before you move on with your life, there is just one quiet invitation. No instructions, no rules, no rush. Wherever you are right now, allow yourself to pause for a few moments. Notice your breathing. Notice your body. Notice that you are here. And in this simple being, remember, God is here too. Perhaps it is in this simple, quiet, present place that time stops being an enemy and once again becomes a space where life can truly happen.